What does the American Rescue Plan offer for small businesses? And are tax hikes on the way? This is the Issues Watch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to episode 69. This past year has been devastating for small businesses. In the most recent stimulus package, the American Rescue Plan, there's an extension of many small business aid programs, and there's some new ones added, all of this to help small businesses. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about these programs with Holly Wade, the Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Business Research Center. The NFIB has 325,000 members, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that we've been a member ever since I started here 30 years ago. Welcome, Holly. Glad to have you here today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is wonderful.
Sure. Could you tell us a little bit about NFIB and what you and your team do to help small businesses?
Absolutely. So NFIB is the largest advocacy organization in the US, and we represent roughly 300,000 small business owners across industry and in every state. And we advocate for them on the federal level, in Congress, in the courts, and also on a state level. So we work on issues that are most important to small business owners, and that certainly includes taxes and regulations and those issues that increase the costs of operating business. And then in the last 12 months with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been doing a lot as far as educating our members and small business owners on many of the small business programs that have been directed towards them and helping them get through the pandemic. And then on the research center side, we have a number of programs that we conduct a series of surveys on small business owners to see how they're doing in the economy and how they're navigating the health crisis.
So let's start with the overall outlook for the small business sector. I mean, obviously, it's been a disaster, with coronavirus. While some large companies have come out of this unscathed, small businesses have been really hit hard. Has this improved at all with the rollout of the vaccines starting in, I guess it was January when it started? Is this helping at all?
Yes, thankfully it has. NFIB, we have produced a regular monthly survey series for the last 48 years, started off as a quarterly survey and has transitioned to monthly. And so we are able to assess the small business outlook every month. And in the last month, well, our most recent publication was in March, we did see an increase in small business optimism, and that small business owners are more optimistic about expected sales conditions going forward, and also general business conditions in their area look like they're increasingly improving. And that likely has a lot to do with the vaccine rollout and how states are responding to that vaccine rollout and lifting some of those restrictions that have been previously placed on them.
Well, that's great to hear. I know I am looking forward to getting out and around more and going to restaurants and things like that I haven't done in what seems like an eternity. Let's take a look at the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which I'm just going to refer to as ARP. And this was signed by President Biden in March. So is it possible to give me or give us a sense of just how much money that's in there is for small businesses in the form of aid?
Sure. So they did develop a number of programs that were specific to small firms. They expanded a few of the programs that were created earlier last year. I mean, the large piece of legislation that passed was the CARES Act, and that had the most money for small firms related to the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. The latest piece of legislation that you mentioned is expanded some of those programs. It added some funding to the PPP program, whole bunch of acronyms that I mean, it is mind-boggling how many acronyms are out there with some of these programs and laws and legislation and all of that. But the PPP program was had some additional funding. The EIDL program, that Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the look included some additional funding. And also, I believe the Employee Retention Tax Credit was expanded, and that was a huge help for small business owners who are still struggling to make payroll and keep business operations going because of COVID and the restrictions and all of that. Also included was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant. So that was established, and the Shuttered Venue program was established. And those two programs are, they're industry specific, but they do cover a wide array of small firms who will likely be eligible to participate in those programs, especially that Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant will be hugely helpful for many in that industry that have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic.
Are they, is that industry, restaurants and hospitality, are they starting to bounce back?
A little bit. It certainly depends where you are in the country, how restrictive your state or local government has been in allowing those businesses to open up. But also with the weather improving for all of those northern states and being able to utilize outdoor space again, that is all helping the restaurant industry, allowing them to increase business operations and open their doors again for some of them. But they're also facing another problem and challenge, which is finding workers to fill those open positions. So while we are working to solve the one problem with rollouts of vaccines, getting people back into the labor market, that's been their new challenge, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know there's legislation that was just introduced in New Jersey that would provide a tax credit or some sort of tax incentive for restaurants and similar businesses to attract employees because they're having a hard time finding them. Were there any other major tax related benefits that are in the ARP that come to the top of mind?
The Employee Retention Tax Credit, that's the biggest kind of tax program. It's one of those that all these programs are going through different agencies. So some programs through the IRS, some through SBA, some through other agencies. So the ERTC tax credit, that's been beneficial and will continue to be beneficial for those who qualify for that. That FFCRA sick and family leave tax credit, while the mandate that was a mandate for those businesses under 500 employees, and there was that tax credit that was associated with it, the tax credit has been extended without the mandate. So that's another tax credit that's available to small business owners who have paid for their employees to take COVID-related sick or family leave. And I believe now it includes their ability to pay for their employees to go get vaccinated, and if they have any side effects from the vaccine, to be able to stay home and have those costs covered too.
So do you have any recommendations looking at the ARP? We have 14,000 members, and I'd say about half of them work in public accounting, which means they serve uh, clients, and many of whom are, of course, small businesses. Any recommendations on what the CPA should be telling their small business clients who are thinking about applying for aid? Any general guidance or thoughts?
Sure. So this has been one of the areas that we've been particularly focused on within NFIB is the education component of all of these programs. They're great programs for the most part, and they have been increasingly more generous and more accessible and more beneficial as legislation has been passed over the last 12 months and also with the ARP. But it is confusing. And so, being prepared and having kind of as many points of contact for small business owners as far as education, and making sure that they know which documents to have, what to have available, so when they talk to their CPA or accountant, that they are, they understand what's required of them as far as paperwork, because all of these programs require quite a bit of paperwork, and it gets very complicated quickly. So, just kind of prepping small business owners on what to expect as far as dealing with that end of these programs, but also just the awareness that they might be eligible for these programs is crucial, because we've found that, while there are many small business owners who are eligible for many of these programs, a lot of them don't realize that they can benefit and that they are eligible. One of the areas that we found was for PPP, that those who don't have employees were also eligible for the program. And so you didn't have to have employees. You could be self-employed and benefit from the program. But we found that most of those, because of how it was advertised from the onset, didn't realize that. And so the education component is also very helpful too.
Yeah, is there a any sort of central government site or somewhere where they list all of these different programs, or is this all you got to find the information by agency, by department, by whoever's administering the program? Is there a central spot anywhere where you can send somebody, a client?
So the SBA website over the last month or so has done a good job in putting all of these programs in one place where you can more easily navigate the information related to the program and see if small business owners qualify. So I believe it's just sba.gov, and prominently on their homepage is a link to access the programs. And I think it says like financial aid or something like that for small business owners. And they have, I believe they also have, they have the PPP, the EIDL programs on there, the shuttered venue, the restaurant revitalization, and they may even have a link to the ERTC, which would then go back to the IRS. But the ERTC might be the only one that isn't listed under the SBA, and that information is located on the IRS page.
So it sounds to me like business owners as well as CPAs should be taking a thorough look at that website. So let's take a look at a few other issues that are impacting the small businesses. Last year, as the various coronavirus aid packages, the CARES Act and so on, as they were being debated in Congress, one important issue that kept coming up, but that never made it across to the finish line, but that was very important to our members, as well as something all the business groups in New Jersey were calling for, and that was liability protection from coronavirus related lawsuits, against businesses that followed all the CDC guidelines, to protect the public and their employees. And as far as I can remember, it seemed, there was a lot of contention between the House and the Senate, but eventually nothing ever got done. Is that a dead issue now, or is that something that may move, or or is that sort of nobody really knows right now?
It is a bit in the gray zone. It is a huge concern for our members. We hear from small business owners all the time, basically terrified that something will happen, as far as a lawsuit brought against them from a customer or employee. And we know that, being able to track it back to one location if somebody does get sick from COVID is really difficult unless it's kind of the obvious large event or something
Right.
that they attended. And so that has been of particular concern for small businesses, small employers. And, that's one of the areas that we've focused on over the last year is making, seeing how, what type of protections that we could support as far as limiting their liability or their exposure to liability on that end. The CDC and the guidelines, the CDC had the guidelines and the states then enacted their own specific regulations related to what small business owners were supposed to do, not do, and they changed. And
Yeah.
so keeping up with all of the shifts and changes with those regulations were difficult. Small business owners, they tried to comply, and we heard from many of them who spent a lot of money, kind of reconfiguring their business to accommodate customers in a safe way and also their employees. But that was always and continues to be a fear of theirs, is that they will somehow, sometime be hit with a lawsuit about somebody contacting or contracting COVID and pinning it on their
Right.
business.
Right. And there's nothing, there's no grand negotiations going on about that right now.
Not
About
that I'm aware of.
yeah.
Our federal GR folks government relations folks might have a better idea of,
Mhm.
they would certainly have a better idea of where
Right.
things are going with that. But it hasn't trickled down to the research center yet where I
Yeah.
am. But I do know, because of the surveys that we've done, that it is definitely a concern for small business owners. They are very worried that, down the road or throughout this pandemic, that they will have to deal with a lawsuit related to the pandemic, and that it could have devastating effects on their ability to operate their business.
Yeah. And here in New Jersey, where probably one of the most um, probably more frivolous lawsuits in New Jersey per capita than anywhere else in the country.
Yes.
We pushed for state legislation on this front, and it went nowhere. It's already a terrible environment out there.
Yeah,
So
and it's just one more additional stress that they have to think about. And certainly in the states, they're working on, legislation, and we're supporting those efforts to help protect small firms from legal action related to COVID. So it is on a state level, as you mentioned, for New Jersey too. But it is just one more stress that they have to think about and worry about in operating their business in this environment.
okay, let me ask you about everybody's favorite topic, tax hikes. So, on a federal level, there's been a lot in the media about President Biden's proposal to raise corporate taxes, I
Mhm.
think from 21 to 28%. Um,
Exactly.
and this would help to pay for trillions of dollars in infrastructure improvements. So, where does that stand right now? Is that politically feasible? Or are there negotiations going on? Where does that stand?
Sure. So all of these efforts are, kind of um, being put together and negotiated continuously, in discussion about what this looks like as far as implementing. and putting it in legislation. The 21 to 28%, the increase for the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, that is something we're certainly worried that it will have a dramatic impact on small business owners. We know that federal taxes on business income is one of their main concerns and stresses in operating their business, regardless if they're structured as a pass-through or a corporation. So about 20 to 30% of our members are structured as C Corps. And so this would be a huge tax hike for them. And then also the proposals for the increase in the personal income tax rates will impact small firms because most of them are structured as pass-throughs. And so that's how they're taxed on business income. And this is just not that there's any good time to increase taxes on small businesses. They are, they do have a difficult time trying to absorb and adjust business operations to deal with these increased costs. But in this particular environment of dealing with all the other stresses, it is a particularly bad time to think about increasing taxes on the small business sector. And unfortunately, it's a fight that we're having to deal with on a federal level, but also in many states, including New Jersey, where we hear from so many small business owners in your state about the threat of tax hikes and previous tax hikes that they're still having to figure out how to absorb and keep their doors open.
Yeah, actually, this is one year that we have elections in November. So nobody has proposed tax hikes in this year's fiscal budget, which has to be enacted by July 1st. But that would be the first year that we haven't seen proposed tax hikes. There have been tax hikes in every other single year. Things are not going too well right here.
Yeah.
So are there any other important issues that are pending that you think our members and small businesses should know about?
I think one of the other issues that we're finding is of particular concern for our members and small employers, but also just non-employers who are thinking about hiring an employee and becoming an employer firm, is the efforts to increase the minimum wage. So the minimum wage increase, I know that New Jersey, you've already increased to your minimum wage, but the federal minimum wage efforts to increase that to $15 is particularly challenging for small business owners, especially in states where their minimum wages and cost of living is lower. And it would just be that much more difficult for them to absorb those added costs. And, one of the education parts of the education component that we have to face is trying to explain that for a small business owner, an increase in minimum wage, an increase in the corporate tax rate, an increase in personal tax rate, increase in paperwork and regulatory compliance costs, it all impacts, it's the cumulative effect of all of this on a federal and state level that's particularly difficult for small business owners to absorb. So it's each one is a challenge, but all of them together is the massive hurdle that small employers and small business owners have to face.
Can you tell us how our listeners can learn more about the NFIB?
Absolutely. You can find out more information about the National Federation of Independent Business at NFIB.com. And if you're interested in seeing some of the COVID-related surveys or our monthly Small Business Economic Trends survey, there's a tab that directs you right to the Research Center, and all of our publications are available to everybody.
Great. And you are the Research Center, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Well, Holly, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today about all these issues impacting small businesses. And, we really hope that things start to look up as the pandemic hopefully fades out. And again, thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been great.